Ladies and gentlemen, first of all, I have to present myself very rapidly. My name is Thomas Tinnefeld. I'm a professor of applied languages in Germany. I'm the host of today's webinar, together with our president, of course, who is present. Let me welcome you to our today's webinar by Dr. Julio Gimenez about teaching and learning during the pandemic, lessons learned, present practices, and new opportunities. This talk actually is inspired by the book International Perspectives on Teaching and Learning Academic English in Turbulent Times, which Julio published together with his colleagues James Fenton, Catherine Mansfield, Martin Percy, and Mariangela Spinillo from the University of Westminster, where I had the pleasure and the honor of meeting Julio when I did my sabbatical, my research semester in winter. And it's actually this book which inspired this webinar and which Julio gave me as a gift. And this book traveled quite a lot, Julio, just for you to know. It traveled from the UK to Taiwan and from Taiwan to Germany. I could get it here. I won't do this. It's next door, but I still have it. And it's very far-traveled book. Okay, so Julio Gimenez is a linguist and educator with a wealth of experience teaching the English language, academic literacy, and applied linguistics at various universities in the United Kingdom. Throughout his career, Julio has gained extensive experience as a teacher, researcher, and author. His research interests encompass a wide range of topics, including academic literacies, mediated communication in professional contexts, and narrative discourse. Julio's expertise in these areas is reflected in his numerous publications, which have appeared in both national and international journals, as well as edited collections. Dr. Gimenez has just published an article about integrating multi-communication research and the business English class in Elsevier's journal, English for Specific Purposes. And last month, which I found very interesting, he started a series of posts on LinkedIn about unpacking multilingual pedagogical practices to realize the potential of multilingual university students. Furthermore, Julio's contributions to the academic community extend beyond his research and writing because he is an active member of several international editorial boards and regularly serves as a manuscript reviewer for scholarly publications. His dedication to advancing his field of research is commendable, and we are fortunate to have him as our presenter today. Como Julio es hispanohablante, permítanme añadir algunas palabras en español. Todos estamos muy contentos de tenerle hoy con nosotros y esperamos con impaciencia su presentación. Personalmente estoy seguro de que será una experiencia inspiradora para todos nosotros. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Julio Gimenez to our today's webinar. We're looking forward to a stimulating and engaging presentation. Julio, the stage is yours.
Thank you very much. Thank you for your kind words, Thomas. I'm really, really pleasantly surprised for your Spanish. It's amazing. We were talking before the start of the webinar about how English people pronounce my name. What I can say is, Thomas, you pronounce my name better than I can do in Spanish. So well done. Yeah, thank you.
And thank you very much.
That's all right. And well, hello, everyone. And thank you very much for joining us from wherever in the world you are today. It's amazing to see people from so different parts of the world. And I'm very grateful for that. So I'm also grateful to ICC for their kind invitation to share my ideas and experiences of teaching and learning during the pandemic. And as Thomas was saying, this presentation draws heavily on the book that my colleagues and I co-edited. And I also want to thank my colleagues, but the 39 contributors to the volume for sharing their experiences and ideas on the topic. So how it all started, I remember at the beginning of the pandemic, talking to my colleagues at Westminster and other universities in the UK and in the world about our experiences and what we were going through, something that will resonate with most of you, I'm sure. And I was wondering, are we documenting what we are doing and this new body of knowledge that we are co-creating here, so that, you know, we can then share our knowledge with other colleagues and maybe use as guidelines should we be faced with the same or a similar situation in the future. And that's how we sort of got together to write a proposal for an edited collection, which Routledge later published. And if this seems that I am getting in a plug for the book, it is because I am. No, seriously, I'm not promoting the book. I'm just trying to be thankful to, you know, my colleagues, Jane Fenton and Catherine Mansfield, Martin Percy and Mariangela Spiglo, and the contributors for sharing so much knowledge and so many experiences about what we were all doing at the time of the pandemic. Now, this webinar, what I have planned, and I hope this will be like a conversation among colleagues. So if you have any comments you want to add something, please feel free to add it in the chat or just butt in. I don't mind being interrupted. You know, it's good that we have so many people from all the world and or different parts of the world, and we can all talk about these things. But how I structure the webinar today is I would like to start by the lessons that we have learned after the pandemic, or by teaching and learning during the pandemic, and how these lessons can now inform teaching practices post-pandemic. And based on these lessons that we have learned and, you know, the changes in teaching practices, what new opportunities the pandemic has created for us. So that's more or less the structure of today's talk. But again, as I said, feel free to make comments or butt in. Now, let's start with the lessons. Of course, there are so many things that we learned from going through to 3 years of pandemic, you know, COVID-19 pandemic, global pandemic. And I have just chosen and picked up a few that I consider more relevant to my teaching experience, and I think will resonate with you in so many ways. And, you know, whenever we choose something, there is something personal. So this is actually my personal choice. But I have divided the lessons into 3 different groups: the technological dimension, the pedagogical dimension, and the affective dimension. I'm going to be referring to each of these dimensions in more sort of detail. But one word of warning is that actually it is somehow difficult sometimes to draw a clear-cut line between the different dimensions, because you will see that they overlap. For example, not being ready technologically speaking might affect what we are able to do in the classroom, and this could have a significant impact on the affective domain, either ours or our students. So, you know, although I like categorizing things as a researcher, I like categories and dimensions, you know, sometimes they, as I say, they overlap. So let's start with the technological dimension. And the first one is, although this won't come to as a surprise to you, is that never before had the need for institutional support been so important. And we realized that we needed this institutional support at the macro level of things. And when I talk about institutional support, I'm not talking only about the physical, that is to say, the hardware, the software that we needed to move from face-to-face to online teaching. Although this was important, because as some of the authors of the book, chapters in the book suggested, sometimes you were teaching from home and you didn't have, the necessary hardware or software to be able to do this. So although physical was important, I think what for me was the most revealing aspect was the developmental aspect of the support, how we needed professional development to be able to, embark on this transition and resulting in, aspects of resilience and adaptability. We have also been talking about teacher resilience and adaptability for a long, long time. But I think what the pandemic made very clear to me, at least, was the importance of resilience and adaptability in professional development. Connected with that, we realized that we needed e-tools. And again, this is context specific and specific to your experience. I realized that I needed new e-tools and sometimes different teaching platforms, probably as you also experience in the UK, universities were not allowed to use Zoom for teaching for, safety reasons and security reasons. So actually we were using our learning platforms, in our case was Blackboard. But before Blackboard Connect was instituted, Blackboard was kind of very limited. And so some other people had to use Teams to teach. But at the same time, Teams had not been developed as a teaching platform, but it was a meeting platform, a communication platform, which was not meant to be used for teaching. So all this was going on at the time we were experimenting with this transition, which was abrupt transition in many cases from face-to-face to online learning. And I realized that, like many of my colleagues and some of the authors in the chapters of the book, that we also needed to teach students how to use these new tools and these new platforms. My students were very technologically savvy, but they were technologically advanced and used technology for other purposes, like keeping in touch and socializing, but they were not using technology for learning. So I realized the need, and I'll come back to this in a minute, the need to develop what we call digital literacies, because students were not fully aware of how to use technology for learning purposes. And connected to this, what I call the digital world. And the digital world for me is a phrase that allows me to put together technology, our approaches and understanding of technology, and how we use technology. And so my question was at a point, do my students and I share the same understandings of the digital world? Let me give you an example. While I was talking about computers and laptops, my students were talking about smartphones. While I was talking about PowerPoints, they were talking about YouTube and TikTok. And while I was using Turnitin to help them, improve their writing and academic integrity, they were talking about Studiosity and more recently, ChatGPT. So what I realized that in my case, I needed to hold or try to reach common ground with them as to the understanding and the use of technology if I wanted to offer a really important and enhancing learning experience to my students. So this takes me to the pedagogical dimension. I realized that student-centeredness was key to digital learning. And I know we have been talking about student-centeredness for decades, but research has come back to us saying, well, sometimes there is a gap between what we think we do in the classroom and what actually happens in the classroom. And so I started thinking about my pedagogical practices and thinking, is my pedagogical practice really student-centered when I haven't given the opportunity to students to have a say in the choices that they make? And this has become more important in digital learning than in face-to-face learning. And therefore, we needed to take, for example, new pedagogical approaches, or different, maybe not new to some of you, but different pedagogical approaches. Some authors of the edited collections were saying how the flipped classroom, for example, was more conducive to learning online than face-to-face. And we needed to adapt these things to offer our students a more meaningful learning experience. And connected with this, we needed to revise and reflect. I know as teachers, we always reflect upon our teaching practices, but this became more central. And, you know, we needed to change or adapt our practices and procedures, and not only in connection to learning, but I think more importantly in connection to assessment. And I discovered in my case that actually formative assessment became a more important element in my assessment practices than before. And this allowed me to enhance the experiences that I was offering students. And this led to new designs, because once you look at the role that students have to play is more central, and then you have to reflect upon your practices, both teaching and assessment practices, then you realize that actually maybe your existing courses, materials and tools need to be redesigned or adjusted to the new pedagogical reality, and an opportunity to actually create this new reality with students. So the affective dimension is actually the third dimension in my category. And it's probably one that is very important. I'm not saying that this is new again, but I think we realized that the affective dimension was much more important and central than face-to-face, than in face-to-face teaching. And I discovered that the social and affective aspects of the dimension were very, very central. And when I talk about social, for example, providing students an opportunity to share short bios of what they were doing, who they are, where they are based, where they come from, their interest, etc., and what I call social moments, providing social moments where students can interact socially and not only to, you know, learn and produce knowledge. And also the affective aspect of these. It was very important for us to realize that actually very simple things like addressing students by their names became something more important during the pandemic, and also offering, you know, opportunities for both pair and group interactions. All this would help to create this sense of community that actually was missing when we move from face-to-face to online. It's easier to develop, I think, this sense of community when you're teaching face-to-face than when you're doing it completely online. And this sense of community was supported by a sense of belonging. And peer support was, what we learned, was one of the key factors in developing this sense of belonging, not only in the class, but also outside the class. And so we had to create new spaces, like, for example, fora and discussion groups outside the classroom where students could continue their interaction and peer support beyond the classroom or the class. And this, together with these two things, the social and affective aspects and the peer support, we started thinking more seriously about the physical and mental well-being. So one of my questions at the time of reflecting, as I said before, about my teaching practices was, by focusing on the academic and the intellectual aspect of learning, have I lost sight of the social and the affective? So I needed to bring these dimensions into my teaching practices so that my experience that I was offering my students was a more holistic experience. Okay, do we want to pause to say something? Because that's more or less what I wanted to talk about in terms of some of the key lessons learned from the pandemic. But maybe we could pause here and see if someone wants to make a comment or have a question. Otherwise, if you're happy with that, I'll continue. And then we have the Q&A session at the end. Mm-hmm. Right. Okay. So if I take all this body of knowledge and these lessons that I have learned and look at my present pedagogical practices, how can I improve and incorporate all these lessons post-pandemic? Because, you know, coming back to normal, or the new normal, as some people call it, it's not always face-to-face, and students have the opportunity, at least in the UK, the opportunity to take hybrid courses like face-to-face and online. Some sessions are face-to-face, some are online. There are courses that are online. Students are not required as before to attend all classes. They can always, you know, attend online. So how can I use the lessons learned to actually improve my pedagogical practices? And you may be wondering why the question mark on this slide, and basically is because they are new for me, but they might not be new for you. And I think that something I learned through the pandemic is that everything is context specific, and it should be, and we should attend to context specificity much more closely. So some of the things that I did was developing new understandings and actually trying to understand the digital worlds that my students inhabit, so that these new understandings could shape my teaching practices so that I can meet students halfway. Maybe some of the examples is that I need to include YouTube videos much more often in my teaching materials and teaching practices, or TikTok. There are some wonderful, and this is something I learned from the pandemic, the world of TikTok. There are some wonderful, very brief videos on stereotypical ideas, for example. So if you want a class where we talk about stereotypes, stereotypical ideas, and how they shape our understanding of other people or other cultures, there are some TikTok examples that are really good to examine. ChatGPT, I know there has been a lot of debate going on about ChatGPT and GPT, sorry, and how it can actually endanger academic integrity and, you know, lead students to plagiarize and all that. And that reminded me of the advent of the internet. You know, when we started using the internet, many people sort of thought, oh my God, what's going to happen with this? I'm not happy with these technological developments. What I understand is ChatGPT is here to stay. So instead of resisting, I think I can embrace it and then teach my students how they can use the technology for learning purposes, and also how to take advantage of all the other benefits that artificial intelligence is now offering. Because I think that in the future, when students start work and they move to the field, the world of work, they might be requested to actually understand GPT or artificial intelligence in general. Connected with that, I understood the need to integrate digital literacies, and connected to what we were just saying, helping students use technology for learning purposes. Ideally, I would like to develop a whole module on digital literacies, but if there is no time or resources for that, at least a whole session in my modules on digital literacy, so that I can help students shape their learning practices and see how they can use technology for learning purposes, and then not only socializing or keeping in touch. I'm not saying that that's not important. We talked about the affected dimension before, but I think trying to strike a balance between the two is important for students to know how they can take advantage of technology for learning. Creating new opportunities, that's another thing that actually I've sort of used as a lesson learned from the pandemic, and offering vibrant, flexible, and more personalized learning experiences that actually put together the physical and the digital world. Maybe I'm too old for this, but I tend to see that most of my colleagues tend to think in binary form, and so we think of the physical and the digital world as two separate things. It's not the same. For my students, they live and go into the physical and the digital world, in and out of this world very easily. And I think our teaching practices should take this into account, that actually how can we merge these two worlds so that we come together to the experiences, the life experiences of our students, and they can use technology as a resource. But not only technology, as Thomas was kindly saying about my work before, also any resource for learning, like, for example, the different languages that my students use. I know that multilingual resources, at least in the UK, unfortunately, tend to be penalized in the English classroom, for example, and everything has to be in English. Well, that's another webinar probably, but actually that is what I would like to do, to actually open up the opportunities in my class, creating new opportunities so that I can enhance the learning experience of my students. And together with this, and what I said before, not only teaching, but also assessment. How do I approach assessment from a different perspective? Creating more integrative assessment so that we don't, for example, in terms of languages, we don't assess, skills in a sort of kind of separate way, because that doesn't happen in the real world. We are talking about authenticity, and I'll refer to authentic learning and assessment in a minute. But if we talk about authenticity, that doesn't happen. You read to write, and you talk to other students about what you're writing, and you listen to other students about what you're writing, so that all those experiences actually enrich your writing, for example, or your research papers. So I think there is a need, at least in my experience, to integrate assessment much more, and also use multiple skills, both traditional skills but also the emerging ones that are, now appearing with new technology applied to the classroom. And this will help me produce more authentic assessment. So the last part of the talk is how can we take the lessons that we learned, the new possibilities of revising and reflecting on my teaching practices, and what new opportunities are there for us. And looking forward, I always remember the attitude of many business people I have worked with for research purposes and other activities, that most of them tend to take threats and convert them, turn them into opportunities. And I think this is what the attitude that I would like to take in terms of the pandemic and post-pandemic, which is how do I turn this threat into an opportunity? And I think we have a great opportunity here to shape institutional policies, particularly in relation to professional development schemes, so that they are more culture sensitive, they are more context sensitive, and they include not only, as we said before, the technical and the pedagogical dimensions, but also the well-being dimension. Many authors of the edited collection mentioned that there was a lot of pressure on teachers, not only to perform well in the digital world, but also to take on more work. And it meant, and that's why we talked about resilience and adaptability, that they needed to actually take on more work. That digital, the change or the shift from face-to-face to online learning meant more work and more demands on the teachers. So this requires a new approach to professional development schemes, not only for new, but also for seasoned staff. And I've been talking throughout the webinar about social and community. And this also applies to us as creating between new and seasoned staff this sense of community of practice. The other point that I think is an opportunity to offer authentic context-specific learning within social pedagogies. And this will resonate a lot, I suppose, with social constructivism. Apart from being student-centered, as we discussed before, social pedagogy, that is to say, being with others, working together, forming relationships, being authentic and genuine is needed as part of our way forward, so that we can offer meaningful pedagogical interactions and we minimize the main problem that many of the chapters in the edited collection mention: social isolation. Many students, talking about students' experience during the pandemic, felt really isolated, and sometimes the technology didn't help. In my personal experience, to help with the bandwidth of the connection, many students were requested or encouraged to turn off their cameras. And if you think about it, you have, like me talking now, and all of the cameras are off. It's very difficult to actually establish and build a meaningful pedagogical interaction. And it's very easy to feel socially isolated. So I think we need to revisit this, and this is an opportunity for us to change and to say, okay, if there is a problem with the technology because the technology is not supporting what we want to do as pedagogy and with pedagogical aspirations, then we have to find a way of doing this. connected with what I said before, an opportunity to offer authentic assessment, genuine tasks with real world links so that students see the real purpose of assessment and how they can apply what they learn through assessment to the real world. And many people make the difference, which I do as well. And I think is an important difference between assessment for learning and assessment of learning. So that's kind of authentic assessment I'm talking about. And trying to strike a real balance between formative and summative assessment. Summative assessment is important. I'm not saying that it's not, but I see summative assessment as more of an institutional issue because I need to progress students to the next level. But formative assessment is more connected to learning because it means that is assessment for learning is an opportunity for students to keep on learning. Whereas summative assessment, as you know, it's once they get their marks, that's it. There is no way they can improve their performance to get a better mark. And the final point I want to make is that for me, learning a real authentic or for authentic context and culture sensitive social pedagogies to really happen, we need students as active participants. And this is not new. What I think is new is the idea that students should be part of a solution, not a problem, as you know, sometimes some approaches to learning, like remedial approaches, tend to see students as a problem, but as part of the solution. And this links with the last comment I want to make from one of my favorite pedagogues, Paulo Freire, who was, I know you know, Brazilian, whose work actually took, you know, an international dimension after it was translated into English. And he says education must begin with the solution of the teacher-student contradiction. And if you think about the examples, the typical example of the digital, the understandings of the digital world that were so different from between me and my students, there was a contradiction because I was saying one thing, they were saying a completely different thing. And by reconciling the powers of this contradiction, we then achieve this social interaction where we are both simultaneously teachers and students. So that's all I wanted to say. Those are the references, and thank you very much. It's been really great to have this opportunity. Now over to you.
Could I make a comment or ask a question, Julio? This is Ross from Switzerland. I thought I'd just switched on my camera. Oh, yeah, I'll switch on again. There I am. I'd be interested to know what you think and perhaps what other people here in the webinar think about the amount of support that they're getting from institutions now when it comes to finding new ways to learn using technology. My fear, and what I'm finding increasingly now in my own institution, and it's very much supported by the international accreditation body, which our university is becoming involved with, is technology per se is a good thing. And especially measurable technology. How many apps have you used in your class this week? And I'd like to think that I'm not a technophobe. I have a degree in electronics, although it was a few years back. But I'm finding that technology is increasingly seen as an end rather than a means. And I'm wondering if you or if other people share that experience. And if so, is there anything that we can do about it? Because I think we can all agree our goal is to try and be the best educators that we can.
If I may start. Oh, sorry, Michelle. Yeah.
Sorry, yeah, so good afternoon, morning. I'm from Guadeloupe in the Caribbean. I think given my experience of COVID and teaching during the pandemic, that yes, I can relate to what Ross just said. But at the same time, I think a lot of kids have come on board because of the technology and the new way of teaching and learning with Kahoots, etc. So I think maybe what I've found is best is if I mix the two, so and adapt my audience for the kids who are more into writing and the more traditional method. That's what I do, and then I might just do some quizzes, etc., online to help boost their learning. And for the others, we have great fun creating applications ourselves and other materials for the others to use. So I think really it's a matter of the audience. But what I would say too, in relation to what Ross said, I think, yes, there needs to be more support at the institutional level, because right now it's mostly, at least in my school, is mostly individual initiatives. Right. Thank you very much.
Thank you for your question. So Julio, would you like to say something?
Yeah. I'm sorry, I thought there was somebody else.
Yeah, I'd like to make a comment to Ross. Miriam is my name.
Yeah.
I really think it depends as well who you're teaching, because in my institution, we normally have adults. And we've come to the point that adults are telling our teachers they do not want to use any tools anymore. And if they want to use tools, they would like to do that as part of their homework, not as part of the online lesson itself. So I think if we exaggerate and have lots of good ideas of using too many different tools, we're actually overwhelming our adult students. And I think it makes a difference whether you're teaching children who are really brought up already as soon as they're born practically using digital tools. It does make a difference if you have adults and even senior citizens.
I think I tend to agree with the points that Ross and Michelle and Miriam were making. What I would like to add here is that there are two kinds of aspects to this sort of discussion now. One is the institutional aspect, and that's why I think we need to educate institutions into not turning technology into a box ticking exercise, because all of a sudden they, as Ross was saying, we now have to start counting how many apps we have used for teaching. And that is the sort of mechanistic and kind of regulatory aspect of technology, and it's throwing away the pedagogical aspect. And I think what we need to do, as probably Miriam was saying, is to say, okay, what is the use and the purpose, and how we can teach students to make use of this technology for their own purposes. And it would be ideal to actually measure the effect of technology on how students have learned to use it for, academic purposes, rather than a box ticking exercise on about how many we have used.
Okay, thank you very much. Let me quickly apologize, because my internet connection failed just a moment, Julio, when you thanked your audience for their attention. Sorry for that, and time and again later. But I'm back, and I hope I'll stay. At least I stay physically, but I hope I'll stay electronically as well. Are there further questions or remarks to be made? We had a remark from Michelle about well-being, but I think you had said that when I was absent, I guess. No more questions. Actually, Julio, it would be very nice if you, although the question is a difficult one, but if you could give us an example of authentic assessment, which I think is very important as well. And actually, a lot of things which you mentioned should have been done before COVID, before this digital teaching phase. Let's say we enjoyed, I'm not sarcastic, not at all, but many people didn't do this before, and they were pushed to make changes due to this development. And that's what you've been talking about, and which was wonderful to listen to, if I may say so. So what about authentic assessment? How do you do that, and what might we others learn from that?
Yeah. Authentic, well, there are, as you know, authenticity has different meanings and takes on different meanings depending on who is using the term. But for me, authentic is related to students, is how authentic this is for students rather than, how authentic it is for me, the assessor. And authentic assessment has to do with authentic learning or authentic teaching, which is how meaningful this is for student, present and future, and how students can actually take this opportunity to learn more. For example, if I want to set up assessment of skills, authentic assessment of skill, wouldn't be multiple choice questions on listening comprehension, because comprehension doesn't happen in a vacuum. At least it doesn't happen in the way we have been taught by international bodies of assessment or testing, how they should be evaluated. As I said before, when you are researching for a paper, and I'm talking about my research as a researcher, and then probably I want to publish a paper. I start by reading, but then I talk to my colleagues about it. And I say, look, I have come across this. What do you think? Have you got other things that I can use to inform my understanding of this issue? And then other people talk to me about it. And then I go to conferences and I listen to that. And then I put all that together and synthesize it and become sort of critical or make a critical evaluation of that. That is what happens in the real world. And so why are we not using that particular example to assess our students' reading, listening, speaking, and writing skills? The same happens in the world of work. We don't work always with people from the same professional background. We tend to work with people from different backgrounds. And even if you think about the university, which is my working place, I talk to my colleagues who are from the same sort of field as I am, but colleagues from different other fields. And I talk to HR colleagues, and I talk to people from other parts of the university that come from other backgrounds and other experiences. So not providing opportunities for students to interact with students from other backgrounds and other disciplines, not bringing different professionals to the classroom to talk to them, is actually not preparing them for an authentic experience in the workplace. And that also happens in the classroom. So if I teach authentically, then I must assess authentically. I don't know if that answers your question, Thomas.
It does. It does. Thank you very much. Are there further questions for the time being?
There were some comments on the chat.
Yeah, there were some comments. Yeah, that's true. So Michelle, you made a long comment. Would you like to talk about that or to ask your question in person?
Okay. Do you mean in relation to emotional intelligence?
For example, yes.
Okay. Yes. So as a result of the pandemic, because it exposed me to different types of training, etc., which I didn't have access before, I find now emotional intelligence is a key element of my teaching. It resonates with who I am. And I find as a result, the students, their engagement, etc., has increased. So I would like to ask the presenter, Mr. Gimenez, I think, Julio, if he considers emotional intelligence could be an aspect of authentic learning and therefore help to promote authentic assessment.
Thank you. That is a very interesting question and comment, actually. Again, together with the affective dimension that we were talking about, I don't know why, in my experience, I just forgot about emotional intelligence. I have been so worried about, academic and intellectual activity that actually it's like I have petitioned my students saying, okay, I'm not going to talk about your affective dimension. I'm not going to talk about your emotional intelligence. I'm not talking to that part of your being. I'm just talking about intellectual. And it's the same as with skills. How can we actually separate when we are talking with a holistic entity, if you wish, which is a human being? So absolutely, I think emotional intelligence, which for me means understanding myself as an emotional person and understanding others around me,
Exactly.
and respecting their views, and should be part of socializing. That is what students, and that's part of authentic assessment, because that's what students will be faced with when they start work. Emotional intelligence in the world of business, for example, has become a central aspect because businesses, more than ever before, depend on people working together.
Exactly.
And being critical groups, and being critical means respecting people's emotions and points of view, and actually capitalizing on diversity. And that's part of what we call EDI, equality, diversity, and inclusion. And those things are key, and I hope will be key in the next, in the years to come in education. And that's
Thank you very much.
That's all right. Thank you for asking the question. There is a question by Miriam, that she says, could you please tell us an opinion about measuring the values and autonomy aspects while integrating them into the course, besides teaching materials? I think, again, is how you measure. And measuring might be problematic if I can use Ross's example in terms of technology. If you had to count and then produce a table saying, yes, I have measured it, and students, got a 10, 11, or whatever number you're using, 100% of this. Whereas I think it's more authentic when you use ideas like autonomy and values to actually teach students to keep learning and to use them in an authentic way. Does that help?
And you mentioned ChatGPT, and I think we should not finish this webinar without talking about this. Can you tell us how you have integrated ChatGPT into your teaching and perhaps assessment? Actually, I'm asking against the background that I've had a research semester now. I'll start teaching in April again. So what can we learn from you in this respect?
I don't know if you can learn from me, but I'm happy to share what my experiences are. I used ChatGPT with my students to produce an essay. And so, first of all, we worked around prompting. The most important thing with ChatGPT is to know how to prompt the system to give you the right answer. What's more, I read the other day that there is a new job created in London as prompter manager, and the salary is amazing. And that is the future. That's why I think we
definitely
don't have to resist artificial intelligence, but we have to incorporate so that students can be prepared in the future.
Indeed.
So I told them, look, first we started working with the prompts. We gave GPT different prompts, and then we analyzed the responses, and we say, okay, so responses and the quality of responses will be related to the quality of the input. And then when we were happy with the example of the essay, we analyzed the essay. And, I taught students how they could actually profit from that. The language was good, so I gave them strategies to look at the language and to imitate the language that was produced. Organizational principles were perfect, so the paragraphs were organized in a very cohesive and coherent way. There was no substance whatsoever. So the form was perfect. So I was telling my colleagues, why are we worrying about this when actually you read and you realize that there is no substance to it? Because what artificial intelligence does is collect ideas from, the web and then put them all together. But there is no reference. Work is not referenced, and there is no substance. It's all superficial. So far, that doesn't mean that in 3 months' time you will say, now I know this has been recorded. And so 3 months down the line, you will say, Julio was absolutely wrong. There is also substance. By the time being, there is no substance to what the artificial intelligence or ChatGPT can produce. We use this in the classroom, and we made a very critical analysis of that, of what was produced. And, students learned that they could use that to guide their formatting, but the work has to be there, put by them. The critical analysis, the using the sources, all that is, for me, academic value was absent.
That's true. So for the time being, it's the case. As you said, we don't know what things will be like in 3 months, 6 months, 1 year, or 2 years' time.
Exactly.
It might change from one day to the next, so to speak. But for the time being, I find it quite reassuring that the situation is the way you presented it, and there's still a lot of work to be done by us humans to make ChatGPT's work better and to improve it. So I guess, because time's actually up, I guess there might not be too many questions left.
Michael,
I think Michael is there, and Michelle. We have to watch time a little bit, but Michael, please, you ask your question.
Very quickly, no, just not a question, just a small statement upon ChatGPT, since it's been mentioned. I totally agree with what Julio just said. I've been playing around with ChatGPT for the past few months. What I've understood is that we have to give ChatGPT the role. What's our role and what exactly we want ChatGPT to do? And then after that, we have to analyze as best as possible in the little box underneath what exactly we need, what information we need ChatGPT to give us. We can regenerate as much as possible, but the bottom line is that when we get a result from ChatGPT, we have to sit down and study so we can forward whatever is given to us to our audience, to our students, to whomever is in front of us listening at the time being. Okay, so personally, I think that it is a good tool to use. It shouldn't be the only tool. Brilliant, great, superb, okay, but let's not forget that the books are still there so we can do our whatever we have to do, okay? We don't leave the pen and paper. Technology is wonderful, and let's use it to our advantage. I agree, I like ChatGPT. I believe that several years ago, we had the same exact reaction with the internet, going back 30, 35 years when it first appeared. Okay, I totally agree with what happened with Facebook, TikTok, and so on, and ChatGPT is the new one on the market now. I believe that there's a ChatGPT 4 at the moment update, if I'm not mistaken, and I use it as much as possible. I see my students like it, okay, but it's not the only thing that I use. But yes, I totally agree.
But what is nice about that is that due to the fact that we can really chat with ChatGPT, that's why it's called that way, we can refine responses, and we can improve the answers we are given, so that there's a real dialogue. And the more input we give, of course, the more ChatGPT will learn, and learn exponentially. That's the chance or the problem about it, perhaps. Julio, please, sorry.
And just to say the last thing, I know I'm aware of the time, we're 5 minutes late, but as Michael was saying, I mean, what is important is to work with students and to take the best that technology can offer us so that we can make our work better. And also learning from students, amazing, all the things that I learned from this exercise, because my students were saying, oh, but we can also do this and do that and this and that. They know a lot about, using for artificial intelligence for other purposes. And we were translating that into the academic world, and it was fantastic.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Julio, for your wonderful talk. Very inspiring to really wrap up this time of the pandemic and to see what we have learned, what we can still use, what we will hopefully continue using, so that we won't forget what we learned in that period in which we really were forced from one day to the next, as you realistically said, to change all our teaching practices. And when we could really be happy if we could transfer what we did in the real world to the digital world. So I'm asking all the audience, all the participants to activate their microphones for a second, so that we can really applaud in the real and traditional way. So, Julio, this is your applause. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you all. Thank you. You've been very kind, and thank you. And it's been exciting.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.